Now what I like to do is I like to build a snare with a little ghost note underneath. So let's dive in here. These are the main areas. We have wave, play type, layer EQ, layer transient, output, effects, pad link, pad mute group, pad LED, you can change all the colors, pad sequencer, the click track, kit MIDI, and pad edit, and knob expression pedal. So let's first start with the wave play type. So any pad that you hit or trigger that you hit, it's going to show up and it's going to highlight. So if you're working on an instrument and you accidentally hit another pad, you got to be careful, especially with the volume, transient pitch, transient release knobs on the front. You can really mess up some of the settings of some sounds, and you can get lost quite easily because you're like, what did I just adjust the pitch on? I'm not sure. If you want to not save, you have to unplug your machine completely. So the way it works is if you turn it off with the on and off switch, it automatically saves. It saves before it turns off. But if you don't want it to save before it turns off, you can unplug the machine. It's not recommended though if you don't want to save anything that you messed up. That's one way of getting around that. Let's talk about the layer. So you have loop, trigger type, poly. So that is for loops. So here's a loop. Let's just start a kit, and then that will probably make a little bit more sense. So we're going to go to an empty kit, and then we're going to grab a kick. So here, let's just start just from the pad. So I'm going to type in kick. Let's just throw in this kick. There we go. So you just drag and drop. That's what's so cool. Now I have a kick on here. Now I can adjust the volume. Okay, I can adjust the pan. I can adjust the chorus, which is the pitch. And the fine is a micro pitch. It barely adjusts it. Fade in. That's really cool for snare drums. Decay. That's the length of the wave note. And then sample, sync, delay. This is very, very cool. So what I'm doing is I'm offsetting it a 16th note for whatever tempo it is. Right here, it's 120 tempo. We'll get to that in a bit. That's how you can create 16th note hi-hats by playing 8th notes. Then you have a dynamic switch. And this is very useful if you don't want to have any dynamics, soft and loud, with your one-shots or your triggering. It's very useful for loops. Then you can have a fixed velocity. So it's always going to be 79. Or you can have dynamic. And all that information goes for layer B2. So we can have a layer. So let's say I want to put a crash on there. Here's a crash. So let's make it 0. And I just want to have a really short crash that's way in the background. I want to have it tight. Less decay. Listen to that. Now let's put a snare. Clear the search and clear crash. Let's type in snare. That sounds good. Now I can go to chorus. Up or down. Now what I like to do is I like to build a snare with a little ghost note underneath. So I go to the regular snares. Let's put solid snare underneath. And now I'm going to go over here to the layer type. So right now it's on layer type mix. That means both samples are playing at the same time. I go to fade. At 80 velocity, that second snare is going to come in. So let's switch the order of this. So now I'm going to be playing the solid snare, and then the ceasefire snare is going to come in once I reach 80 velocity. Let's turn the decay time down a little bit. Let's switch that snare. I'm going to go a big snare. So you can just drag and drop right over a wave. There we go. So now we have a small snare into a big snare. That's fade 1. Fade 2 is now we have a fade point, a starting point and an ending point. We have X fade, which it turns into it. These fade 1 and fade 2, it's a fade in, then it mixes with the sound. With X fade, it X fades, it switches. And now switch is just a switch. X fade is a little bit smoother from the fade 1 and fade 2. And it mixes, it's a mix. Now switch is switching layer A below 80 velocity and layer B right here is higher than 80 velocity. So like that. Sounds really cool. Now, the purpose of the layering and the layer type function is to get some realism, some realistic feel and sound out of these electronic sounds. Bring that decay back up. I like to do X fade for snare drums. That sounds really nice. So let's put a hi-hat in. Each instrument that you put in, the layer type is going to be slightly different. So I'll show you hi-hats. Throw in this one and then the open. So this is what I do for, so we could utilize the hi-hat function. Now we go here to pad. This is what you have to do to utilize the expression pedal. Go here to pad edit knob and expression pedal. Right now it's on master effects control. We don't want that. We want to put it on foot type. There we go. So that's how we can control the hi-hat. Like that. If you didn't have an expression pedal or hi-hat pedal, we'll put it on switch. So anything below 80 velocity is going to be played layer A, which is the closed, and layer B is the open. Anything above 80 velocity. Now, they're playing on top of each other. And if you go SW switch mono, mono means only one sound is going to be played at the same time. The sound is going to cut off the other sound. Sounds really cool. That's what I like to do. I like to go all the way up to 126. 127 is max. Let's add a little bit more cymbal. Now if we wanted to add in a loop, let's type in 174 and scroll down here. Right here, here's a bass loop. Okay, let's try this bass loop here at 174. I'm going to drag it on pad 3. Right, pad 1, 2, and 3 are my go-tos for loops. So right when I drag in a loop, I usually put it on layer A, and I come down here immediately, and I go to loop, and I'm going to turn loop on. So you could do 2 times through, 4 times through, or 8 times through. I just turn it on. And the most important thing about loops is it's got to be a perfectly timed loop. If the loop is off, if the loop is messed up in some way, it's just going to loop whatever the starting point and the end point is, and it could be totally off time or whatever. So these loops are perfectly on time. When you drag in these loops, they should be perfect. So now, trigger type, instead of one shot, I'm going to choose alternate, and I'll show you why. You hear that? It can play over and over on top of itself. And now when you press trigger type from one shot to alternate, it's going to play when you hit it once. When you hit it again, it turns it off. So it's like an off-on switch. Isn't that cool?